story about individuals who find themselves incarcerated, whether that be in jail or in prison, and dispelling the falsehoods about the women and the men, and also the children who enter into the criminal justice system. This is also not a discussion about advocating for being soft on crime and not holding people accountable for their actions. This is not a talk about that, 'cause definitely we do need law enforcement. But I wanted to just talk about and take a trauma lens in the lives of the many women and men right here in Sioux City, who I encounter on a day-to-day basis, and probably some of you may have encountered as well. Cerebro's Regional Jail Alternatives is a program, and our mission is providing alternative solutions and guidance for a satisfactory quality of life, recovery and law-abiding existence that meet mental health and co-occurring needs of justice-involved adults with severe mental illness. The Sioux Rivers Regional Jail Alternatives Program is a post-arrest program. So that means that individuals have to first be arrested and placed in jail. And the goal is to link individuals from the criminal justice system to community-based treatment and services, whether that is mental health, addiction services, housing services, etc. And the ultimate goal is, what I have underlined, is for each of those individuals to return to community and live a law-abiding existence. So that also means a reduction or a resolution of their criminal charges. The Regional Jail Alternatives Program is not our diversionary court, so it is not a mental health court. We do have here in Woodbury County several diversionary programs, diversionary courts. Mental health court happens to be one, and family treatment court, veterans treatment court, and drug treatment court exists here. But the jail alternatives is not. The difference is that in the mental health courts or the diversionary courts, those are limited to a special docket, so a list of pending cases within the court, and it's only for individuals who have that specific issue, so to speak, mental illness, or specifically a drug treatment or drug addiction issue. And there's a specialized docket, so it focuses more on rehabilitative disposition options as opposed to punitive. With the Regional Jail Alternatives Program, services are provided regardless of the plea that the individual enters into. There are no legal options prohibited. And even when the defense chooses not to link the mental health issue or substance-related issue to the criminal activity, services are still provided. And that's the difference between the regional jail alternatives and what happens in the diversion courts. Defendants, I don't like to use that word, but for clarity, defendants continue to receive jail alternative services after the court case is complete, okay? So who are the justice involved? So according to the Bureau of Justice statistics, there are 2+ million people barred in jails, prisons, and immigration detention centers in the U.S. 715,000 persons reported to be under jail supervision in the entire United States, and that's according to a census that was taken back in 2015 with the Bureau of Justice statistics. 6% are under community supervision, and some are non-confined. 1.2% serve weekend sentences, so they may have an electronic monitoring device placed on them. 780,000 is estimated to actually be under jail supervision in the United States. I'll go back to that last. So when we speak about jail populations, the jail populations are high turnover populations, so a person can enter jail and they may be there for a few hours. They may be there for a day, more than a day. It's hard to say. Many times they are there pre-trial and they're there for a lengthy period of time based on a lack of the ability to come up with bail money. In particular, individuals with serious mental illness are affected more often, and research has shown that individuals with a severe mental illness or substance-related illness or dually diagnosed generally spend quite a bit more time in jail and have quite a bit of trouble while they are in jail, simply due to the inability to cope with the demands of community life. So the justice involved, who are the justice involved in Iowa? So there's 3,900 persons that are reported to be under jail supervision in Iowa. This is a statistic from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. 0.9% are in community supervision and are non-confined. 0.6% are working or serving weekend sentences, and 4,100 is estimated to actually be under jail supervision. And that is from the persons under jail supervision by jail jurisdiction. That is a census of jails population. Here in the Sioux Rivers regions, which covers Woodbury, Plymouth, and Sioux County, our jail population here in Woodbury County typically runs anywhere from maybe about 150 to a little over 200. I have 200 here just as a solid number. Sometimes our jail runs a little bit over that amount. In Plymouth County, their population runs anywhere from 25 to about 35 individuals in their jail. In Sioux County, a much smaller jail, typically runs 15 to about 25. When they reach the 25 number, they are at capacity or are getting pretty full. Same thing with Plymouth County. When they reach that 30 mark of individuals in their jail, they go over that, they are at capacity. Here in Woodbury County, we have the most need. In our jail, we just a capacity of 200 or more. That's over capacity for Woodbury County Jail. And it's much harder on our sheriff's office and the correctional officers. So, characteristics of the justice involved. Many times individuals have a perception that the justice involved, they typically are just individuals who are troublemakers, come from troubled homes, backgrounds. Sometimes individuals have a perception that the justice involved are from a particular racial group specifically. But here the characteristics, as you can see, women and men, all ages are represented, all races, cultures and ethnicities, religions, sexual orientation are represented in the justice involved population. All socioeconomic statuses are included. Although those who come from a background where their socioeconomic status is much higher, they are able to afford bail money generally. Specialized populations is severely mentally ill, which is a population that I specifically work with, and the co-occurring, those with a co-occurring illness. The intellectually and developmentally disabled are also represented, and those with a traumatic brain injury That number is found to not be, is growing a little bit because what they're finding is that individuals who cycle in and out of the jails have had an assault of some sort, and so may have a traumatic brain injury that has not been diagnosed. Substance-related illness, whether that's illegal or legal, prescriptions, and other addictive behaviors. The homeless are highly represented in this population. And typically you find that there are chronic health issues, so diabetes, hypertension, infectious diseases, physical pain, back pain, etc. And lastly, trauma is always present. And so that's why I began this with, do you know what happened to me? To take a trauma lens. These are the faces of the justice involved with a severe mental illness who have died in America's jails. This was a study that was done, an article that was written in the Virginia Pilot, and they have done a jail in crisis series. As you can see, it's very diverse. And from the faces of the individuals, they're just people just like you and I. Nothing distinguishing, nothing different. So the impact of incarceration. I have here just a carceral culture, and I bring that up because it's well known and well documented and well researched that and well talked about this school to prison pipeline and the nature of our society to incarcerate in overwhelming numbers. So this notion of a carceral nation and also this carceral circle, what we call today the school to prison pipeline, this was coined by Michel Foucault, and he was a cultural theorist and French philosopher of the 20th century. And his idea of this was that there's no supervision by the courts, and that is apparent today. It also exists to this day. So when an individual is incarcerated and they appear before the court and that case is done, whether that person is sentenced to go to prison or they are sentenced to do time in jail, the court is done. If the court orders that individual to go into treatment, their responsibility is done. There's no supervision. The court doesn't go back and check and say, did that person actually go to treatment? Did that person actually finish that time? There's no supervision. So no accountability there at all. The prosecutor is essentially done with the case. The defense attorney, their legal obligations are done. But for that person who's in the system, it's not done for them. So what happens is we're highly adaptable as human beings. We're highly adaptable to the environments that we enter into. And so what happens is that person develops an adaptation in a carceral behavior. Person who enters into jail for the very first time, that's a traumatic experience for them. Whatever happened to them for them to get arrested, to go to jail, was also a very traumatic experience. Once they are there, then they have to adapt very quickly to their environments around them. So what's there is we all learn as human beings to manipulate in certain ways. Everyone does. But it's a higher level there. You learn to barter. There are diminished life skills. So individuals who are in and out of jail or either prison, their behavior changes, how they stand, their body language is altered. Generally, a person, I'm gonna move out from here. Generally, an individual will stand in a way that is docile. So maybe here, hands in front. Or they may stand because they don't know what to do with their hands. So they will stand with their hands in back of them. Or is always showing the hands so as not to intimidate anyone. Other behaviors that are picked up is a loss of the ability to have conversational language. So they learn the language that's used within the jail or the prison. At times, if you ever have an opportunity to spend time with someone who has spent time either in prison or in jail for a lengthy period of time, they eat very fast. Hands will come out again. They're sitting, they will sit covering their food to keep anyone from invading them. They eat very fast because there's a time period that they have to eat, or someone may take it. There's not that much food, so there's always a feeling of hunger. Okay. Hunching over the food, saving cigarettes, or other, picking up the habit of smoking, saving cigarettes and other items like toiletries. If they have family members that can pay money for commissary, sometimes they will not use that, they will save it so that they can barter. And that could be a way that they can either save themselves from any type of assault or any other type of manipulative aggression. There is a lot of times aggressive posturing. So a person will stand, and this is men and women. They will stand in such a way so that they seem intimidating. A lot of times they learn to raise their voice, flail their arms in ways when just to intimidate if they're not seeing that they're getting their point across. Other times they may appear indifferent. You may have a conversation with them about something that's meaningful, about changing their lives, and they may appear indifferent, but that is something that they have learned and have adapted to in the environment that they have been in. Distrustful of anyone showing any kind of kindness or generosity, because in that type of environment, no one gives you anything for free. No one is just kind to you for no reason. So returning to community, those behaviors and that adaptation doesn't change. So returning to community, you have to teach that person all over again how to be in community, that you don't have to barter for cigarettes, or you don't have to question all the time why a person is being kind. So there is, at the most crucial point, is a loss of the independent spirit. So where you and I we got up this morning, we got dressed, we came here, we didn't ask anybody for anybody's permission to get up, what time, we just made up our mind, got dressed, came on, and we're here. But for a person who has cycled in and out of jail or even prison, for them, they have lost that ability to function, that independent spirit. And in a sense, you can say they have become institutionalized because they need someone to tell them, and they need to report, where they're going or what they're doing. We talk a lot about risk, needs, and responsibility. Hear that a lot when people are speaking about the justice involved in law enforcement, criminal justice, and that is just a series of assessments that are used to assess whether or not an individual is going to recidivate or whether or not they're going to return or to jail or to prison, or whether or not they're going to commit another crime. And also, how risky is that they're going to not show up for court. In addition to the impact of incarceration, and this is from a trauma lens, so exposure. A person who is captured, who is arrested, they are handcuffed, depending upon if they are fighting or highly aggressive, they are placed in what is called a turtle suit, which is confining and restricts their movement. Whatever is happening at that time, if there's any kind of open wounds, they're open, they're exposed. No one stops and says, oh, you got a cut, or oh, you got a gunshot wound. It's exposure. Their entire body is possessed, so they have been captured. So if you think about when those of us who have had like moles or anything in our yards, we set the trap to get rid of this pest out of the yard. So anytime you think about setting a trap for an animal, that animal gets caught in that trap, and their movements are restricted, and a lot of times they are killed, right? And they are removed. Well, this is the same thought for an individual at the moment that they are captured or arrested. Exile is another issue. Their possessions and property are confiscated. They have no access to anything. They are restricted as far as place, housing, employment. So in a sense, they are separated at that moment from society. Then they are confined. In the jail environment, their ways of living is altered overnight. The types of communication, even their sexual behaviors, all of that shifts and changes within an instant. So when you think about the jail environment, it's very limited. So a person who spends a good amount of time in jail, they have that little cushion of a mattress, very confined space. So over time, that takes time over the body. There's research that describes our environment and the aesthetics, things that are aesthetically pleasing to us, and how that helps our health. And it affects how we feel about ourselves, and it affects how our mental health as well. So a person who is confined in a limited space and on furniture that really can't really be considered as furniture, that affects their health as well. So when they come out of that, then they come out with these chronic conditions, back pain, sore muscles, and that's from their environment. Social ostracism. So a person who is justice involved, even though they may be released from jail, there is social ostracism there because they are considered very different from those of us who've never been to jail. There is an inability to develop meaningful human connections and friendships because they have adapted to a way of life where they don't know who. They have to gauge whether or not they can trust an individual or another person. Then there's arranged compensation. So an individual has damages, whether or not they they have a victim that they've harmed, so there's damages there that have to be paid. fines, jail fees, court costs, loss of power and control and learned helplessness, poverty and uncertainty. The social impacts of the justice involved in our communities. So it changes our landscape. It changes how our communities look. So evolution of urban, suburban, and versus rural spaces. So we have a large number of individuals who are, say, sent off to prison. Those individuals are going to another county and they are being counted in that county. So that changes our space. So as far as carceral employment dependence, that's one that we have to think about. I, as a social worker who works with the justice involved, depend on people going to jail. I wouldn't have a job. The corrections officers, sheriff's office, police, that is carceral employment dependence. So all of these occupations depend on the justice involved. The criminal justice system is now the largest employment sector in the United States, and that's based on our carceral culture. It affects electoral mapping, so how our districts are drawn. When you have a number of individuals who are leaving the community and going into another community, or a number of individuals who happen to come into our community and then get arrested and are in jail or go to prison, those individuals become where we can count them, but they can't benefit us in any way other than that. Distribution of state and federal resources is also a way that is a social impact. Even the definition of our national borders and the maintenance of it. And then also gender roles and identity shaping is also a social impact, because in a confined environment or a carceral environment, those gender roles and identities tend to be shaped very differently. So when a person goes to jail, there's uncertainty. As I mentioned before, all of their possessions and property are confiscated. They have no access to anything. So there's uncertainty. They don't know. A lot of times they don't remember the phone numbers, so they can call anyone. And a lot of times people don't know that they're in jail. Their family members, if they're connected with their loved ones, they have no idea where they are. There are various times for the release. So a person, if they're arrested at a certain time, it's generally going to be the time that they are discharged. So a person, if they're arrested about 3 o'clock in the morning, it becomes time they're ordered for release, they're going to be released around the same time. So imagine you being arrested, not having any access, not having anyone to call, and then you're released. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, you got arrested, say down in Des Moines. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you're released. What do? No money. So, this is what the justice involved. And if you're a person who has a severe mental illness, a substance-related illness, what do? No home or furnishing, no clean clothes. The clothes that you're arrested in are the clothes that are returned to you once you are released. If you have mud, any kind of soilage on those clothing, that's what you're getting back. Loss of employment, suspension of entitlements, loss of familial and social supports, and you are entered into a permanent social class association. So you become marginalized as a criminal, a felon, a lawbreaker, a crook, a lazy person, a drug addict, all those negative terms. You are no longer considered a human being, a man or a woman who has a mother and a father, sisters and brothers and cousins. You're no longer considered that. You are dehumanized. So, what is needed to help the justice involved? First, we know is money, of course. That's always the big one. But the next thing is civility. I have empathy last, but empathy also is very high. Civility, the ability for us to think about, back to the title of this, what happened to me? Think about all of the things that have made up that individual prior to them being arrested and even after being arrested. We don't know if that person, experienced any type of abuse in their families growing up or any type of abuse as an adult. But what we do know is for those who are experiencing homelessness and who have a severe mental illness, they are exposed to the elements. Homelessness within itself is a trauma. It's a traumatic experience. Having to figure out on a day-to-day basis where you're going to sleep. If you break into a car, you get arrested. If you break into a building to get out of the elements, you're arrested. If you steal a sandwich because you're hungry, you're arrested. So, I put here non-judgmental harm reduction approach in this community, which is very much a conservative community. Harm reduction is not something that many people really like to talk about. But harm reduction is one thing that is very helpful. So a person who has a substance-related illness, we don't want them to abuse any type of illegal substances or alcohol or any other legal substance. We don't want that to happen to them. But we also don't want them to be in community and hurting others while they're in community. So we have to find a happy medium between that. And part of harm reduction is also an evidence-based practice, and you typically find people who talk about harm reduction with the needle exchange programs in other places, okay? So for those who are abusing opiates or heroin, needle reduction exchange programs so that they are not using dirty needles and not exposing themselves for risk of HIV, AIDS, and other communicable diseases, and then spreading that within the community because it becomes a public health issue. So harm reduction is helpful in that. The non-judgmental part is the part where we began, the trauma focus, is looking at each and every person as a human being. And where we started today, we talked about assisting those who are in the jails, and the scripture that was read in Hebrews, in the prisons. And those who are disadvantaged, viewing them as if it was us in that situation. Trauma-informed is taking into consideration that sitting down and instead of looking at what that person has done, asking what happened to that person for them to get where they are or to be where they are. And when I sit down with individuals, that's the first question I ask: what happened to you? Crisis care. Crisis care is essential for individuals who are having a mental health crisis. But a crisis care in the sense that there's no turn away. So we don't get to pick and choose who can stay and who has to go. ACT, teams, That's assertive community treatment, and FACT is forensic, assertive community treatment teams. Forensic is working with the population I work with, the justice involved. And those are teams that are assigned 24 hours a day, typically to work with individuals who have already transitioned into permanent housing. And there is a psychologist or psychiatrist, usually a nurse practitioner, a social worker, support team, a peer support person, all in one team. And they interact with that person on a rotational basis, 24/7. So that person has someone that's meeting with them and helping them cope and teaching them how to be and remain in community and how to stay and remain in their home on a daily basis. Mental health crisis response, those are things that, the region, the mental health region has been looking and planning and having planning meetings on, and there's also been several planning meetings to develop a word slipping me now, detox center. And then also empathy. So where do we begin? We begin by what we're doing today, and that is being educated and receiving information on what actually happens in the life of a person who enters into the criminal justice system from the moment that they are arrested to the moment that they are sustained in the jail and the moment that they are released back to community. And so advocate for criminal justice reform at all levels. Also, public safety review, I put that there because a lot of our public ordinances, we could take a look at them. And for some individuals, especially those experiencing homelessness, some of the things that they are arrested for, it's almost like we're criminalizing the homeless, so we can kind of take a look at that and review it and see if we can make some changes in how we charge individuals. And I think the one thing that is most important is, I think, the reduction of duplication in the community services. We have a lot of community organizations that provide good services and good work here, and so we don't need to recreate the wheel. So working together and collaborating with all of the community organizations to provide services for this population. So what our future could be is, I love this picture because it's a hospital, it's a psychiatric center, but this is in New Brunswick, so it's in Canada. But they have a new facility for individuals with severe mental illness. And those who are mandated by the courts to receive treatment or to receive a mental health assessment. So a lot of times when a person is mandated by the court to have a psychiatric examination through the courts, it takes a long time for that to happen. And that person lingers and languishes in jail for months sometimes, when all that's needed is that person to just have an appointment and be sent. This particular center provides services. They have a dentist, chapel, woodworking, a clothing store. I mean, they have everything that they, to provide for the needs of the individual. And that's my presentation. I hope that what I have said to you and what I've explained to you has given you a little bit more insight on the lives of the individuals, kind of dispel some of those myths about them and their experiences. And because some people tend to think that individuals, when they cycle in and out of jail, that they like to be in jail. And I hope that this gets you thinking about some other things that you can do when you leave here in the community to help this particular population. Thank you.